Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Golden Eagle. This car was a 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, and it has been blamed for the death of around 14 people. It was said that this car started out as a police car originally, but there were 3 officers assigned to this car who all ended up taking their own lives and other people's lives in horribly violent ways. Not in the car, but still, super weird that this all seemed to happen after they had been using the car for work. Because of this strange correlation, it ended up being sold off to another man. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it was said that because of the rumored cursed car, it became a point of interest for vandals. People began to vandalize the car only to meet their own untimely fates, which were all met in strange ways. For example, it was said that one vandal died from being struck by lightning, and another ended up having his head removed by an 18-wheeler. It is said that the curse is so strong that one person decided to merely touch the car, and it sent him into madness as he went on to commit atrocious crimes after that. The car now belongs to Wendy Allen, who supposedly collects and decorates haunted cars for a living, so it seems as though it's finally found its home. Far, far, far away from everyone else. In our number 9 spot today, we have James Dean's car. Famous actor James Dean passed away from a car accident on September 30th, 1955. He was driving his silver Porsche 550 Spyder, which he had just purchased recently. This was only the beginning of the car's curse, however, as after James' passing, the remnants of the totaled car were bought by a man named George Barris. He decided to sell the parts of the car to James' fans, but when the car was being worked on and taken apart, it ended up falling on a mechanic and it crushed him to death. These 2 incidents are more than enough to now consider this car cursed, but it still continues on. Once the people who had purchased some of the car parts began receiving them, more strange things happened. 3 of the people who received parts ended up in car accidents, all of which were sadly quite severe. The shell of the car was also stolen, and to this day it has never been recovered. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Black Volga. The story of the Black Volga starts off when it was realized that this limousine was found to be linked to multiple disappearances over the years. The incidents occurred in the 60s and 70s in Ukraine, and the stories are weird. Basically, the most well-known story pertaining to the vehicle says that one day 2 girls approached the limo and were suddenly sucked inside. A witness saw this happen and went up to the car, but there were no signs of the people that he had just seen. Suddenly, this witness saw flashes of white lights, and the next thing they knew, they found themselves waking up several days later with a pounding headache. Apparently, other people have come forward with similar stories to this one, but no one can quite figure out what's behind this mystery. And some people even think that the Black Volga is driven by Satan himself. In our number 7 spot today, we have the jumping car. So this is a weird story that comes to us from Cape Town, South Africa in 2004. One night, a family here who owned a Renault Megane were inside their home when they heard their car start up. Of course, they probably thought that somebody was trying to steal it, but when they looked in the car, no one was there. They decided the best thing to do would be to follow up on it, so they did end up calling the police to come to investigate. When the police got there, they weren't quite sure what to do with this story until, right in front of their own eyes, they watched the car with no one inside start up completely on its own, and this time it proceeded to plow right into a tree. After this crash, they investigated further and found out that the handbrake had been engaged. They of course contacted the car's manufacturer, who said that perhaps the car may have had a faulty or rusty starter, and while that is definitely quite a reasonable explanation, it fails to cover how this car seemed to hit the throttle all on its own. This is all exactly why people believe that this car may have actually been haunted. In our number 6 spot today, we have the sedan. Of course, it is well known that Bonnie and Clyde were the notorious criminal couple who completed a series of robberies and such back in the 30s. Their crime spree was brought to an end on May 23, 1934, when police surrounded their Ford sedan and let somewhere around 100 bullets fly into it. Of course, this was the end of the couple, but their story has survived on, and that is exactly why the sedan that is riddled with bullet holes found its new home in Whiskey Pete's Casino in Nevada. It's definitely already quite creepy to look at, but there are visitors who claim that something more is going on. Many have suggested that they have felt some sort of presence that makes them extremely uncomfortable when they're anywhere near the car. Others have reported being able to actually see shadowy figures inside of the vehicle. Maybe in the end, Bonnie and Clyde are still around somewhere. In our number 5 spot today, we have JFK's Lincoln. Former United States President John F. Kennedy met an ill fate when he was assassinated during a visit to Dallas, Texas in 1963. On that fateful day, the then president was traveling in the motorcade in his Lincoln SSX 100. Because this is such a historical moment, the car of course wasn't used after that, and instead was part of the investigations before being turned over to the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. It is here where people have reported some spooky happenings around the Lincoln. Many visitors have reported seeing a man in gray standing near the car, sort of like a shadowy figure that is keeping watch. It is also said that the most common time to see the gray man is during the month of November. This is quite peculiar considering the fact that JFK was actually killed on November 22nd. Could this be a coincidence, or is this the ghost of the former president? In our number 4 spot today, we have Elvis's Cadillac. Elvis was known as the king of rock and roll, and he was also known for his lavish, beautiful red Cadillac. Since his passing, the car hasn't been seen very much, except for those who have apparently seen the ghost version of it. Apparently, many people have reported seeing quite a talented Elvis impersonator driving a red Cadillac through the area, only to realize that this is not the case at all when it suddenly disappears through a wall. At least this one isn't leaving people with creepy feelings or simulating accidents that scare people. Maybe the king of rock just wants to go for a cruise sometimes. If you ever take a trip to Graceland, keep your eyes peeled for the phantom red Cadillac. In our number 3 spot today, we have the van. Dr. Kevorkian was a man who is called an angel of death. If you haven't heard of these people before, they're doctors who like to euthanize patients, normally against their will. I think there's a word for that. This piece of work was doing just that, and one of his most important tools was his large white van. Yeah, huge red flag already. The van later went on to have the nickname Deathmobile, and it made headlines again when it found its way into a pawn shop. The reason the person who had previously had it didn't want it anymore is because they claimed that there were strange occurrences that began happening once it was in their possession. This story led to paranormal investigator and ghost hunter Zach Baggin purchasing it. Apparently people who enter the van immediately feel just overwhelming sadness, and they also feel like there are unseen eyes that are watching them at all times. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Death Limo. Okay, so this car is not only apparently haunted, but it's a huge part of history as well. So the Gräf Stift Death Limo was the one that the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was in with his wife when it stalled outside of a cafe for seemingly no reason. It was here that the pair were killed, which is one of the events that really triggered the start of the First World War. This would already be quite the story, but things only continued on for this haunted car. Throughout the next 12 years, there are said to have been 13 more deaths that were attributed to the car. One man went crazy while driving the car, there was a military police officer who crashed it with other people inside, there was another owner who also crashed it. You know, just a lot of terrible things happening around one single car. The vehicle now sits in the War History Museum in Vienna. Now here's the thing. You, like I am right now, would likely be thinking, after all of those accidents, the car should be absolutely totaled, right? Apparently it's not, and this is just another thing that adds to the mystery surrounding it. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Surrey ghost car. On December 11th, 2002, a call came in to the Surrey Police Department. The caller reported that they had just seen a car lose control and run off the road and then presumably crash. It was of course an emergency call, but not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. That was until authorities got to the location and realized that they couldn't find any kind of evidence of a crash. They kept searching, and they ended up finding a maroon colored car that was nose down in a ditch nearby, but this car was covered in so much undergrowth that it must have been here for months. This means that somehow this crash went undetected for 5 months, and worst of all, so did the body that lay nearby. Using dental records, they were able to identify the body as a man who had been wanted for robbery since July of that year. It is said that the sighting of the car leaving the road was a ghostly replay of the events that had taken place 5 months prior. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Death Limo. Okay, this car is not only apparently haunted, but it's a huge part of history as well. So the Gräf Stift Death Limo was the one that Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was in with his wife when it stalled outside of a cafe for seemingly no reason. It was here that the pair were killed, which is one of the events that really triggered the start of the First World War. This would already be quite the story, but things only continued on for this haunted car. Throughout the next 12 years, there are said to to have been 13 more deaths that were attributed to the car. One man went crazy while driving the car, there was a military police officer who crashed it with other people in the car, there was another owner who also crashed it, just a lot of horrible things happening around one single car. The vehicle now sits in the War History Museum in Vienna. Now here's the thing, you, like I am right now, would likely be thinking, after all of those accidents, the car should be absolutely totaled, right? Apparently it's not, and this is just another thing that adds to the mystery surrounding it. In our number 9 spot today we have the 1937 Cord 810 Worcester. This car was initially stored away for a long 75 years before, in 2017, it was brought out again. The car was hidden away for so long because it was initially built specifically for a Louisiana senator who wanted a car that had some armor in order to protect him. Unfortunately, however, this senator was shot and killed before he was ever even able to use it. From there, the ownership was passed on to a naval officer, but he too would go on to meet an untimely fate in the Second World War, and this happened again before he was able to get behind the wheel of a car, which is a really eerie connection. Because of this dark and seemingly coincidental history, many people have been questioning whether this car should have ever been taken out of storage. Maybe this is just one car that wasn't meant to be driven. In our number 8 spot today we have Elvis's Cadillac. Elvis was known as the king of rock and roll, and he was also known for his lavish red Cadillac. Since his passing, the car hasn't been seen very much except for those who have apparently seen the ghost version of it. Apparently many people have reported seeing quite a talented Elvis impersonator driving a red Cadillac through the area, only to realize that this is not the case at all when it suddenly disappears through a wall. At least this one isn't leaving people with creepy feelings or simulating accidents that scare people. Maybe the king of rock just wanted to go for a cruise sometimes. If you ever take a trip to Graceland, keep your eyes peeled for the phantom red Cadillac. In our number 7 spot today we have Bus 375. This story takes place on a bus referred to as the Midnight Bus or the Bus of Fragrant Hills because that's where it was headed to on its route. On midnight of November 14th, 1995, the final bus of the night pulled into the bus terminal. This bus would go on to mysteriously disappear, but before it did, some strange things occurred. Before the bus left the terminal, 2 passengers got on the bus. One was a young man and one was an older man. The bus departed and headed on its route, but while headed to one of the last stops, the driver saw 3 shadowy figures waving at the side of the road, so the driver pulled over so that he could pick them up. As he pulled over, the driver just got this strange feeling, as if something wasn't quite right. His instincts were kicking in, and he couldn't see their faces at all, but he decided to ignore these feelings and he let them on the bus. Shortly after these 3 people got on the bus, the old man picked a fight with the young man, claiming that he had stolen his wallet. Things escalated to a point where both men were kicked off of the bus and only the driver and the 3 figures were left on as they sped away. Once off the bus, the old man explained to the young man that he likely just saved their lives because those 3 figures were actually ghosts. He had noticed that he couldn't see their feet and that they were floating. The following day, the 2 men would learn that bus 375 had vanished, and just 3 days later would be found at the bottom of a lake. Inside the bus, they found 3 decomposed corpses. What exactly happened on that bus after the 2 men got off remains an unsolved mystery. In our number 6 spot today we have the van. Dr. Kevorkian was a man who was called an angel of death. If you haven't heard of these people before, they are doctors who like to euthanize patients, normally against their will. So this piece of work was doing just that, and one of his most important tools was his large white van. Yeah, huge red flag already. The van later went on to have the nickname the Deathmobile, and it made headlines again when it found its way into a pawn shop. The reason the person who had previously had it didn't want it anymore is because they claimed that there were strange occurrences that began happening once it was in their possession. This story led to paranormal investigator and ghost hunter Zach Bagan purchasing it. Apparently people who enter the van immediately feel just overwhelming sadness, and they also feel like there are unseen eyes that are watching them at all times. I don't know why you'd want the van of a serial killer, it just seems weird to be honest. In our number 5 spot today we have bus number 7. I don't know what it is with haunted buses, but this one takes place in the 1930s in London. One night a man was driving on an empty street, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, when he reached the intersection of Cambridge Gardens and Ladbroke Grove, a double-decker bus just just appeared out of thin air right in front of him. He swerved to avoid the bus, but unfortunately ended up crashing into a tree. When authorities later went to check to see what bus was on that route at that time, they came to find that there was in fact no bus scheduled in the entire area. There were even some people who witnessed the crash and say that the red bus vanished after the accident. Over the following decades after this incident, there were more accidents and even some fatalities with a very similar story. A red bus with all of its lights on, but no one on it. Not even a driver. Eventually, authorities decided that something needed to be done, so apparently there was some work done to the area like street widening, extra streetlights to assist with the visibility, and this work took place in the 1990s, and since then, there hasn't been any more reports of the number 7 haunted bus. In our number 4 spot today, we have the jumping car. So this is a weird car story that comes to us from Cape Town, South Africa in 2004. Basically, one night a family here who owned a Renault Megane were inside their home when they heard their car start up. Of course, they probably thought that someone was trying to steal it, but when they looked in the car, no one was there. They decided the best thing to do would be to follow up on it, so they ended up calling the police to come and investigate. When the police got there, they weren't quite sure what to do with the story until, right in front of their own eyes, they watched the car with no one inside start up completely on its own and proceed to plow right into a tree. After this crash, they investigated further and found out that the handbrake had been engaged. They of course contacted the car's manufacturer, who had said that perhaps the car may have had a faulty or rusty starter, and while that is definitely quite a reasonable explanation, it fails to cover how this car seemed to hit the throttle all on its own. This is exactly why people believe that this car may have actually been haunted. In our number 3 spot today, we have the F1 car. Back in 2018, during the F1 season, driver Daniel Ricciardo expressed his frustrations during a press conference, saying that he was sure his car was under a curse. This seems like a frustrated driver just expressing that, but it might have been something more. His Red Bull F1 car had an awesome preseason run, and there were strong performances in those early trials. Even at the beginning of the season, he was able to land himself 2 wins. That's a great track record, but after his win in Monaco, things started to change. His F1 car abruptly started to have issues, so much so that it caused him to have to stop early in 8 different races. That's quite a significant amount, especially considering how well he was doing. In the end, maybe this was just a stroke of bad luck, or maybe something more sinister was at bay. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Black Volga. This story of the Black Volga starts off when it was realized that this limousine was found to be linked to multiple disappearances over the years. The incidents occurred in the 60s and 70s in Ukraine, and the stories are weird. Basically, the most well-known story pertaining to the vehicle says that one day, 2 girls approached the limo and were suddenly sucked inside. A witness saw this happen and went up to the car, but there were no signs of the people he had just seen. Suddenly, this witness saw flashes of white lights, and suddenly they found themselves waking up several days later with a pounding headache. Apparently, other people have come forward with similar stories, but no one can quite figure out what is behind this mystery. Some people even think that the Black Volga is driven by Satan himself. In our number 1 spot today, we have JFK's Lincoln. Former United States President John F. Kennedy met an ill fate when he was assassinated during a visit to Dallas, Texas in 1963. On that fateful day, the then president was traveling in a motorcade in his Lincoln SSX 100. Because this is such a historical moment, the car of course wasn't used after that, and instead was part of the investigations before being turned over to the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. It is here where people have reported some spooky happenings around the Lincoln. Many visitors have reported seeing a man in gray standing near the car, sort of like a shadowy figure that is keeping watch. It is also said that the most common time to see the gray man is during the month of November. This is quite peculiar considering the fact that JFK was actually killed on November 22nd. Could this be a coincidence, or is this the ghost of the former president?
Usually when people think of hellish vehicles with dark spirits living inside them, they don't really think about a Prius. I would never have guessed that one of the most attractive things about someone walking around in the afterlife is good mileage. But in this video we can see something pretty freaky.
Officially confused and a little freaked out. The windows are up. There's no air coming in, and even if there—
For whatever reason, this guy's rear view mirror decoration just keeps spinning in the window. All the windows are up, the car is off, there's completely no air going through the car. It's very strange. Maybe it's like a ghost cat or something just playing around with it non-stop. Number 9. The Irish ghost car. The Irish ghost car sounds more like a wrestling move or a boozy drink that's so powerful it makes you feel like you're in a moving vehicle. But it's actually an unexplained spectral vehicle that was terrorizing some villages in Ireland back in 1920. It was spotted mainly in the villages Athleague and Mount Talbot. People who saw it said that it could move at speeds way faster than any vehicle on the road. It also could phase through anything like other cars, buildings, hills. It seemed to have a supernatural ability to move through objects. A few people who got a look at the car said that there was no one driving it, but a bunch of people inside with white robes on. They couldn't tell who the people were, but they did look humanoid. Now, an elderly couple who saw the ghost car actually died from fright, which I think is like 1920s talk for a heart attack. Being a doctor back then would have been so easy. You're just slacking around. If someone died, you could be like, oh yeah, it was just the spooky thing that killed you. Number 8. The Kent Road Wraith. In the 1950s, there was a road in England which had a ghostly motorist disturbing everyone who dared to come along its path. It was Kent Road in southern England, where drivers reported seeing a black car that had an older make but would move like something more modern. Some people even said that the car moved like something that they've never seen before, like it came from the future. Most reports stated that people who looked into the car saw no one driving it, but a few claimed to have seen some sort of ghostly figure behind the wheel, like some sort of wraith. One police report came from a man who saw this car parked on the side of the road. He pulled over to see if the driver was okay, but there wasn't a man inside, but this fog-like wraith figure. He tried to shake the car, but the figure didn't move. We all know that you need a silver-plated sword if you want to get a wraith's attention. That's common knowledge. Number 7. The Vanishing Land Rover. We're staying in England and we're moving over to the town of Cotsworth, England. It's always small tucked away places that have to deal with things like UFOs and cursed cars. You leave the city for a little peace and quiet, and next thing you know you're knee deep in some supernatural turds. I guess that's the trade-off. In the country, you have demonic vehicles. In the city, you just have demonic people. This vanishing Land Rover was spotted in 1965 by a man who was just minding his own business, driving down the road, hurting no one, when a Land Rover rushed in front of him. The strangest thing about this car, it wasn't the terrible drivers or the erratic behavior, but the headlights were off. Instead, a ring of light was coming from the top of the car, and then out of nowhere, it disappeared. Number 6. Rose on Red. Now we're gonna jump over to St. Petersburg, Russia, where Tatiana Shevchenko encountered a demonic red car with rose-tinted windows. She had just gone off work and she was walking home when a mysterious rose on red car pulled up next to her. A man dressed in all black offered her a ride, and she said yes. I guess sometimes you have such a long day at work that you would risk dying just so you don't have to walk home. When she got inside, the interior wasn't that of a car's but a brightly lit room. She said there were 2 humanoid figures inside who introduced her to a tall man who called himself the Cardinal. She then passed out and then woke up standing where she was picked up, and no time had passed. Was this just a fever dream, or should we all be on the lookout for the rose on red car? Number 5. Triplets. This next one was reported in Vitalajärvi, Kankanpää, Finland in 1993. A man was driving down a road in the middle of the night when an extremely bright light came up in his rearview mirror. It was so bright it was almost blinding. It was another driver with some high beams from hell, so he tried to speed up to make a little bit of distance between him and the other driver, but the car was moving so fast that it zoomed right past him. While the car passed him, he looked inside and saw 3 beautiful women, all with pale skin and silky white hair. This doesn't sound very cursed. Well, not until a few minutes later when he saw the headlights barreling towards him. They seemed to come out of nowhere. They were coming in so fast, and it was so out of nowhere that he couldn't get out of the way. He then braced for impact, and the last second the car vanished. And the beautiful ladies. Number 4. Ghost Tractor. You finally learned to use your ghostly powers for possession, and now what's the first thing you jump into? A tractor? I think I would at least try to get my hands on a Subaru or something with a little better handling. Well, this video shows what I'm assuming is the ghost of John Deere taking control of a tractor. I don't even know if John Deere's dead or if it's a real person. The tractor starts on its own and then starts driving around the farm.
As if possessed, the tractor suddenly makes a right-hand turn and begins motoring down the driveway. The tractor makes its way across the farm before attempting to drive straight up a tree.
You can see it taking turns. It does seem like someone's controlling the wheel. Thankfully, the tractor works its way onto a tree and then gets stuck. If I was working on that farm and I saw this video, I would just hang up my overalls and do something way less dangerous like backyard wrestling. Number 3. Ghost ride the whip. Back in 2008, many of us thought that spinning rims and gold grills would bring us happiness. Turns out, you actually have to do a lot of work on yourself to achieve that. Who knew? Some of you remember ghost riding the whip, where you would jump on top of a car as it was moving because it was really cool. Well, it seems that this trend has followed into the afterlife. There you can see terrifying footage of what looks like a ghost hovering on the roof of a car while it drives by. I wonder if that means he can use the carpool lane. I don't know why a ghostly figure is hovering above this car. Maybe the spirit is attached to something on the highway or the car itself, or maybe it's just some fancy editing. Number 2. Self-starting car. I feel like we should get to the self-driving part before we get cars to do the self-starting part on their own. This one is super eerie. It shows security footage of a car starting on its own and then it just starts driving. You can see through the window that there's no one driving the car, and you can tell that this isn't just a parking brake situation because the car lunges forward. The car doesn't make it very far because it ends up being stopped by something off camera. So do you think this is a ghostly driver trying to make an escape? Or do you think it's just a faulty spark plug? I don't know. Number 1. Driverless car. This one is so freaky. Back somewhere in the early 2000s, CCTV footage caught a driverless car pull up on a security point. The car stops at the gate and the security guard in the booth notices that there's no one driving the car, but in super creepy cruiser fashion, you can see the steering wheel moving from side to side. He steps out to check what's going on, and then a ghostly figure that looks like the girl from The Ring crawls on top of the car. If you don't believe me, here's a video. You can see the reaction of the security guard. He probably pooped his pants real good. Now this might have been some twisted prank, but I don't know if someone would drop the money on a self-driving Tesla just to prank a few people, especially not prank a few security guards. They got it hard as it is.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the ghost tractor. This story comes from someone who goes by the online username Need More Cowbell, and their creepy late night driving story starts off by explaining that they and their friends decided to drive 4 hours to Kings Island in Cincinnati, and they decided to go super early so that they would be there when it opened. They planned to stay until close and then drive back. They continued on saying that they were in 3 different cars, one of the cars only carrying them and one other person. They write, quote, "We were going south on 75 coming down Jellicoe Mountain, and we were about an hour from home. All of a sudden I saw a stopped tractor trailer rig in front of me. I jerked the wheel hard to miss it and fishtailed a bit and got it back under control, only to look back and realize that there was nothing there. Nothing too unusual about a really tired person hallucinating, but my friend looked over at me and asked if I saw the tractor trailer rig too. Neither of us had been drinking and the night and road were completely clear. The people in the car behind us did not see anything. This was without a doubt one of the strangest things to ever happen to me. I can totally see why they would be completely freaked out. A phantom tractor trailer just in the middle of the road definitely could have had a way worse ending than it did." In our number 9 spot today, we have the London Underground haunting. Old cities like London hold many stories of paranormal experiences and freaky, unexplainable encounters. One of these common stories is that of ghost trains going through the underground stations at night, and many train drivers experiencing ghost encounters and other spooky situations. One person told their story of their encounter with one of these unsettling ghost trains on the London Underground. He was waiting on a train with his parents when they heard the sounds of a train arriving just a few minutes early. They immediately noticed something strange when there was no wind from the train's arrival, an every time occurrence on the underground. As the train got closer, they looked through the windows of the cockpit area and noticed that there was no driver inside of the train. It got even more strange when the doors slid open and there was not a single passenger inside. They went to board when his mother stopped them, saying not to get on. The train sat with the doors open for what felt like several minutes, as though trying to convince them to get on board. Finally, the train left, and shortly after, their proper scheduled train arrived, with a gust of wind, a driver, and full of people. Who knows where this mysteriously empty train may have taken them if this mother hadn't stopped them from boarding. In our number 8 spot today, we have the ghost crash. This story starts off with the storyteller explaining that they and their daughter were driving to Oklahoma City from Wichita Falls, Texas, in order to catch a flight home to Pennsylvania. They were driving down the I-44 and it was 4:05 a.m. and the highway was empty. They continue on, quote, "We were almost out of Lawton city limits when we saw an older model car, light blue or silver, launch off an embankment, roll 3 or 4 times end over end. I could actually see a human fly through the air. I pulled over and called 911 and gave them the GPS coordinates of the overpass. I asked the dispatch if I should back down the highway and she told me not to because there was an officer less than 2 minutes away. 20 minutes later, I get a call from the police asking exactly where it was. I repeated the info. The officer said that he was sitting at that location and there was nothing there. Not a skid mark, broken glass, or flattened grass, nothing at all. When I got home, I googled it. This is what I found out. Exactly 10 years prior, a group was speeding down a suburban road when they lost control, flipped over a guardrail, and rolled down the embankment. All 6 in the car were killed. They were driving a 1986 Oldsmobile. The time of the accident was 4:05 a.m. Seems like this person just happened to see a horrible tragedy of years past. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Golden Eagle. This car was a 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, and it has been blamed for the death of around 14 people. It is said that this car started out as a police car originally, but there were 3 officers assigned to this car who all ended up ending their lives and other people's lives in horribly violent ways. Not in the car, but still super weird that this all seemed to happen after they had been using the cars for work. Because of this strange correlation, it ended up being sold off to another man. Throughout the 80s and 90s, it was said that because of the rumored cursed car, it became a point of interest for vandals. People began vandalizing the car, only to meet their own untimely fates, which were all met in strange ways. For example, it is said that one vandal died from being struck by lightning, and another ended up having his head removed by an 18-wheeler. Okay, not good. It is said that the curse is so strong that one person decided to merely touch the car, and it sent him into madness as he went on to commit atrocious crimes after that. The car now belongs to Wendy Allen, who supposedly collects and decorates haunted cars for a living. You know, she's living life on the edge, taking a risk every day. So it seems as though it's finally found its home far, far away from everyone else. In our number 6 spot today, we have Kimling Station. This station landed a spot on this list because legend has it, it has a ghostly vehicle that likes to travel along its tracks. Back in the 1970s, the authorities in Stockholm were starting to build a line that would head out to Kimling, and prior to them starting the work on the line, they decided to start with the station. Once they started building this station, however, one day construction on it abruptly stopped in 1976, never to be started again. While authorities just assumed that one day they could casually resume the construction, theories and legends began to take hold instead. The station started earning itself an eerie reputation, one that suggests that this station is actually the station for the dead. People believe that the reason that construction randomly stopped at this station is because those who were building it happened to stumble upon something very sinister. There's even a saying that goes along with the stories: only the dead get off at Kimling. In our number 5 spot today, we have the road stop. This story comes from someone who goes by the username LTT, and they start their story off by explaining that one night they were in Vermont and they were driving back from a friend's cabin because their grandmother was very, very sick and in hospital. They threw the address of the hospital into the GPS and took off from the cabin at about 2 a.m. as it was more of an emergency situation. After driving for 2 hours, they realized that they needed to stop somewhere to pee, so they pull off at the next visitor center they pass, which was completely void of any humans or cars. The bathrooms were locked, but the porta potties outside weren't, so they enter one of those to do their business. When they open the door to get out, despite the fact that there are 4 porta potties in a line, there is a man waiting outside of the one that they were in. He looked at him, and the man said, "Be careful out there, you never know what kind of weirdos you will find." Makes my stomach turn just saying it. The writer is totally confused because why would someone say that? Why is he there? And why was he waiting outside of that stall? The weirdness only escalated when he realized that this man must have been driving the 18-wheeler that was suddenly at the rest stop, but how did he not hear it pull in? He books it back to his car and drives away as fast as possible. He continues on writing, quote, "I kept thinking back to his face. Nothing seemed right about the dude. His blank stare, his voice, he even had a weird smell that I can't really describe that was both strong but subtle at the same time. At this point, he's now about 20 minutes away from where this encounter happened and has since calmed down a bit, until he writes, I, quote, slow my speed when I hear that same monotone voice come over my CB. Passing on the right, all of a sudden, without warning, that creepy truck zooms by me going at least 30 miles per hour faster than I was, without headlights. Now by this time, the early morning twilight was coming through the mountains, but it was still pretty dark out. The only lights this truck had were the amber running lights on the side of the trailer and the tail lights. Then, as quick as the thing screamed by, it was gone. For 9 years I have been trying to explain how this guy was driving that fast on those tight roads without headlights, and I just have no clue. Maybe I was just way too tired, maybe the guy did have headlights on and I just didn't see them come up to me around the bend. I don't know, but it is definitely the creepiest event I have ever experienced. In our number 4 spot today, we have James Dean's car. Famous actor James Dean passed away from a car accident on September 30th, 1955. He was driving his silver Porsche 550 Spyder, which he had just purchased recently. This was only the beginning of the car's curse, however, as after James' passing, the remnants of the totaled car were bought by a man named George Barris. George decided to sell the parts of the car to James' fans, but when the car was being worked on and taken apart, it ended up falling on a mechanic and it crushed him to death. These two incidents are more than enough to now consider this car cursed, but it still continues on. Once the people who had purchased some of the car parts began receiving them, more strange things happened. 3 of the people who received parts ended up in car accidents, all of which were sadly quite severe, and the shell of the car was also stolen, and to this day, it has never been recovered. In our number 3 spot today, we have the funeral train. Back in April of 1865, the American president at the time, Abraham Lincoln, was assassinated. After this event, he of course needed to be transported home, and to do this they placed his body on a train back to his home in Springfield. This is of course terrible, but you didn't come here for a history lesson, so you might be wondering why I'm talking about this at all. Well, this is the story behind the reason why people think that every year in April there is a phantom train, the ghost of the one that carried the former president, and people say it runs through 180 different cities. You can't always see the train itself, but people report hearing it and seeing its lights. Another strange thing that happens is how many people have reported that, when they had an experience with this ghost train, their watch or clock died at the exact same time that the real train would have passed through on its original journey. Many people have said that when they saw the ghost train, they thought it was real before they watched it disappear before their very own eyes. In our number 2 spot today, we have the sedan. Of course, it is well known that Bonnie and Clyde were the notorious criminal couple who completed a series of robberies and such in the 30s. Their crime spree was brought to an end on May 23, 1934, when police surrounded their Ford sedan and let somewhere around 100 bullets fly into it. Of course, this was the end of the couple, but their story has survived on, and that is exactly why the sedan that is riddled with bullet holes found its new home in Whiskey Pete's Casino in Nevada. It's definitely already quite creepy to look at, but there are visitors who claim that something more is going on. Many have suggested that they have felt some sort of presence that makes them extremely uncomfortable when they're anywhere near the car. Others have reported being able to actually see shadowy figures inside of the vehicle. Maybe after all this time, Bonnie and Clyde are still around. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Surrey ghost car. On December 11th, 2002, a call came into the Surrey Police Department. The caller reported that they had just seen a car lose control and run off of the road and then presumably crash. It was of course an emergency call, but not necessarily anything out of the ordinary. That was until authorities got to the location and realized that they couldn't find any kind of evidence of a crash. They kept searching and ended up finding a maroon colored car that was nose down in a ditch nearby, but this car was covered in so much undergrowth that it must have been here for months. This meant that somehow this crash went undetected for 5 months, and worst of all, so did the body that lay nearby. Using dental records, they were able to identify the body as a man who had been wanted for robbery since July of that year. It is said that the sighting of the car leaving the road was a ghostly replay of the events that had taken place 5 months prior.
At number 10, we have the Jaguar XJ220. This is a beast of automotive engineering. It's absolutely beautiful. This thing looks like a car that you could race James Bond in and destroy him while stealing his girls and making sure that the bad guys win the day. I'm not a car guy, but you can't argue that this car isn't sexy. It's so sexy. It's sexy like ScarJo with red hair packed into a tight leather one piece trying to save the world. If you were lucky enough to ever get your hands on one of these bad boys, it would be the last thing you would want to lose. Well, one of these was found abandoned in a desert in Qatar. Someone snagged a picture of the car, and car junkies started to lose their mind over the mystery of how such a beautiful piece of art ended up a pile of junk covered in sand. One explanation is some rich guy bought it and they didn't want it, so he just left it in a desert. But there was only 281 models of this car, so even if you're a rich punk who's terrible at recycling, you would still want to hold on to this thing just for your collection. And on top of that, it only had 1,000 kilometers on it. It seems like the car almost walked away on its own to live a life of solitude in the desert, just like Car Jesus. At number 9, we have the 1933 Plymouth Roadster. This car is an old school gem. It's kind of like the 70-year-old dude at the family get-together who has crazy stories of partying with Mick Jagger and doing body shots off Madonna. This Plymouth Roadster is sleek as hell. Just looking at it makes me want to drag race with some dudes with greased hair and then go get a milkshake at Pop's Diner. Well, it would make me want to do that if I wasn't black. I would rather not travel back in time to the 30s, thank you very much. But even though this car is fire, one of them, along with 10 other rare cars, was found in the basement of a house during a demolition. David Mount was doing a demo job in North Carolina and dug up a treasure chest of classic cars. On top of the 11 cars he found tucked away in the basement, there were even more buried around the property. The owner of the property just let David have them. Why would this guy give away all these classic cars? Well, I don't have the answers. This is a mystery list. Come on, guys. At number 8, we have Rolls-Royce Centurion. You know this car, you love this car, and if you don't know it, you're kind of a pleb. This car is meant to symbolize the peak of luxury. This is like getting a massage from the world's greatest physiotherapist while someone feeds you caviar. It's a car that says, I don't know how to drive because I get driven everywhere, and then I laugh while drinking champagne. So why was one of these cars found next to some railroad tracks in Russia? A picture of an abandoned Centurion was flying through the interweb and people started freaking out. And it's rightly so, because this car will run you $350,000. And it wasn't long after this car was spotted that it disappeared from the railroad tracks. So who owned it previously and where did it end up? Who came through and scooped it? These are the mysteries I come to bring you guys. At number 7, we have Russian construction vehicles. If you were to venture through the forests of Russia or Siberia, then you might come across what looks like a vehicle graveyard. After the fall of the Soviet Union, mass production of cars and other vehicles was halted. No one had any money to buy cars, so there was no need to make cars. The Russian government took charge of clearing them all out and piled them in massive junkyards. It's a mysterious sight, seeing miles upon miles of broken down cars. Why were each one of these cars left behind? Maybe some of them never had owners, or maybe some of them were stolen from other people and then sold so you could have a little bit of scratch to get by in the oppression. At number 6, we have a Maybach. If you're working security at a parking garage, you should keep your eyes open for some cars that have been left behind because you might be sitting on a gold mine. A picture in 2012 of a Maybach started a frenzy. This car was sitting in a parking garage in France, covered in dust, and it hadn't been moved for months. This Maybach would run you around 400,000 euros, and it kicks off with 550 horsepower. The mystery was never solved as to why this car was left, but a lot of people believe that maybe the owner was arrested or maybe even killed. At number 5, we have a 1929 racing Bentley. I know this thing is fast, but I wouldn't let it get away from me. I hate myself for that joke. Back in 2011, a group of explorers were checking out some old abandoned homes in Surrey, England. I think they expected to find rats and black mold, but what they came across was something a lot more valuable than a lung infection. They found an old as hell racing Bentley tucked away in a barn. These cars were previously used to win the Le Mans races, and the car that they found was in extremely good condition. It's thought that the owner of the car may have died or the car was stolen, and the price tag on this thing is around $400,000. Kind of where all these cars are sitting right now. At number 4 we have the Aston Martin DB4. Yeah, this is the car that James Bond drives in all the movies. Although it didn't come with machine guns under the headlights. I think that's something you need to install on your own. But back in the 70s, an American entrepreneur got his hands on one of these bad boys and parked it outside his house, and then it never moved again. Eventually someone discovered the car and was able to identify that no one was there to take care of it. The thing that really blows my mind about this find is, where did this guy go? Was he left behind, or did the car leave him? And the car was run down, rusted, it could not be driven. Like, the thing was literally falling apart, and it was still worth over $300,000. A broken down car that can't be driven. It can't do the one thing that cars are supposed to do, and it's worth more than me and all my friends. At number 3 we have a Ferrari F50. It was only a matter of time before we made our way to a Ferrari. They're one of the most famous cars in the world, and they also make clothing for guys who think chin straps are fashionable. This Ferrari was found in the Ibadan desert in Nigeria, beaten to hell, and these cars aren't easily replaced. There are only 349 in the wild, and they are considered a collector's dream. Anyone who wants to have an exclusive car collection wants one of these in their lineup. These cars are so rare that if anyone tries to sell one from their collection, it can run as high as $2 million. That's $2 million for a used car. A used car that moves so fast it's not even good for driving on anything other than a racetrack. I wonder what it's like to spend $2 million on something just so you can look at it. Must be nice. At number 2 we have the Lamborghini Mera S. This is one of the classic Lambos. When you picture an old school race car, this is the vehicle that comes to mind. One of these iconic roadsters was bought for a man known as the Greek Elvis. He's like regular Elvis but has a lot more body hair and smells like feta cheese. This guy loved his exclusive car but drove it a little too hard and then had to take it in for repairs. He took it to the Hilton in Athens, parked it in a basement, got in a disagreement with the people at Lamborghini, and then left the car there. This was back in 1969 and the car stayed there for 30 years. Eventually someone took it, fixed it up, and then sold it at auction for almost $500,000. And for our number 1 spot we have a Ferrari 459 GT. Alright guys, for this last one we have the most mysterious story I could find. So this mysterious car has all the pieces of the other car stories on this list. It has a big price tag, it was a pretty exclusive car, and it was found in the middle of nowhere. This one being in the back streets of Japan. What separates this one from the rest is a few key details. The car was found with someone's belongings inside of it, as if the person left the car in a hurry, or as if the car left him behind, like the title implies from this video. Also, the car was a custom job. It had a custom gear shift and custom spokes. Why would someone go to so much effort to have this car specifically made just to leave it out to break down and rust away? And lastly, they ran the license plates but they couldn't connect it to any person. Who owned this car? Number 10. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's Phaeton. If you don't know who the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is, then you should probably play more World War I shooters. It was his assassination that started World War I, and his assassination took place in this car. It wasn't just that he was assassinated in the car, but that he avoided an assassination attempt earlier that day. He was on his way to the hospital to comfort the people who were harmed in the crossfire. On his way there, one of the assassins had stopped in a cafe to get something to eat, saw the Archduke passing by, and well, started World War I. Not only that, but the car was involved in 6 accidents and 13 deaths. Some people would die only months after owning the car. Number 9. John F. Kennedy's limousine SS-100. The whole world was stunned on the morning of November 22nd, 1963, as John F. Kennedy was assassinated on television. Something super strange about this navy blue Lincoln, it was upgraded with almost $200,000 worth of features, none of which were making it bulletproof or putting some sort of protective cover over top of it. However, after Kennedy was killed, the limo was kept in service, because you can't really blame a car for that. It was given all sorts of protective measures like titanium plating and bullet resistant glass. I guess hindsight is 2020. Number 8. Ghost crash. On December 11th, 2002, police started getting phone call after phone call about a set of headlights running off of Britain's A3 highway. Crashes on the highway aren't unusual, but people stopping to find the car couldn't see it anywhere. So police went to go investigate. They found no recent crashes, but a Vauxhall Astra that had been covered in vegetation. It seemed the car had been there for at least 5 months. So whose headlights were people seeing drive into the ditch? My guess is it was a ghost who was like so tired of being stuck on the side of the highway and wanted to go to the funeral home so he could party with other ghosts. Number 7. Ghost bus. It was a foggy night in London, 1934. A man driving normally when suddenly he swerved off as if he was trying to avoid something, hit, crashed into a wall, and was killed instantly. Witnesses say there was nothing in his way to make him swerve like that. But legend talks of a ghost bus that roams the roads. It'll appear out of nowhere, look like it's going to crash right into you. It's said to be a big red double-decker bus that'll appear around 1:15 in the morning. People who've seen it say the bus will be coming right after you, and after it passes, if you check your rear view mirror, there'll be nothing there. It could be a real ghost bus or just another reason not to do drugs. Number 6. The Black Volga. During the 1960s and 70s throughout Russia and Eastern Europe, people were terrorized by the myth of the Black Volga. The Volga limo was the most expensive car in Russia at the time, and they were specifically designed to hide the identity of the person inside the car. They had tinted windows, and if that wasn't enough, you could do that whole movie trope when you see someone creeping in your window from a distance like Because the car had such a secretive tone and was priced so high, rumors started speculating about who would be driving one. People would say it would be priests or politicians, other people said it was the devil himself. Conspiracy theories got so far that they say they saw kids get pulled into them, and if you touched one, you would die within 24 hours. None of these myths have ever been proven, so this might be a game of telephone that got out of hand. Number 5. Renault Magne. It's 2004 in Cape Town, South Africa, and you hear a roaring sound come from outside your window. You pop out to see what's going on, and you see a jumping car. Apparently 9 people saw a car start up on its own and start jumping backwards until it crashed into a fence. So they called the guys from Top Gear to have a look. No, they called the police. When the police arrived, they didn't believe anyone at all. They probably thought everybody was high. Then, the car started up on its own again and started jumping backwards into a tree. Upon further inspection, it seemed the car had a rusty starter cable, which might have been the cause of the startup, but what was making it jump? Number 4. Bonnie and Clyde's Ford Deluxe. The original ride or die couple. Imagine meeting the one. I mean the one. Like they're so much into your stuff and you that the two of you team up and go around America during the Great Depression, robbing banks, killing cops, and looking on point while you do it. Bonnie and Clyde were 2 of America's most notorious criminals and somehow managed to keep a healthy relationship going while they were on the most wanted list. The 2 traveled around in a stolen 1934 Ford Deluxe, and on May 23, 1934, it would be their final resting place. They were ambushed by cops and shot more than 100 times in that bad boy. Now what happened to the car? Well, in a way, nothing. The car was kept exactly as it was the way Bonnie and Clyde died in. Every last bullet hole. You can go see the car now at Whiskey Pete's Hotel and Casino in Nevada. The reason it's on our cursed car list is because people who take pictures in front of the car say that they can see figures floating in the background. It's not just because 2 people got turned into Swiss cheese in the back seat. Number 3. The Le Mans disaster. Now this curse isn't an ongoing horror that torments people for 100 years like the Chicago Cubs goat curse, but it was a massive disaster, one of the worst car wrecks the world of racing has ever seen. In 1955, driver Lance Macklin was taking his turn out of the pits and back onto the tracks. He was driving an Austin Healey 100. I'm picturing him rolling out on the racetrack in like a pair of motorized Healeys. Mike Hawthorne was coming in hot, driving a Jaguar D-Type and barely missed Macklin. Macklin swerved to try to steady himself and ended up in the left lane. He doesn't see Pierre Levay flying in behind him at 150 miles per hour. Pierre hits the back of Macklin's sick Healey and goes flying into the crowd, killing 81 people and injuring 120. You don't have to worry about that happening today if you go to car races. At NASCAR they got those nice nets so you can eat liquid cheese and get a neck sunburn without dying. Number 2. James Dean's 550 Spider. What's a good way to be considered cursed? Kill one of the most beloved actors of an era. James Dean was an American heartthrob and badass who died tragically at age 24 in a car wreck. This bad luck racer was named Little Bastard. If you're gonna ride in something every day, maybe give it a nicer name. But it wasn't just James Dean that this car tormented. After his death, the car was purchased and brought to a shop for repairs. Then it slid off the lift and broke a mechanic's leg. After this, parts of the car were installed in 2 different cars. One driver died, one driver was seriously injured. Some people tried to steal the car once and they were both injured. The car doesn't even like thieves, it's on no one's side. The car eventually mysteriously disappeared while being transported. I'm sure it was stolen. The car that killed James Dean is probably worth millions and might have his sexy ghost inside it. And number 1 on our list is the 1964 Dodge 330. This car has been named the most evil car in America, more evil than the PT Cruiser or that man-eating Zamboni that I just made up. This car actually has a pretty wild story. It was originally a police cruiser, and all 3 officers that were issued the car eventually committed suicide after killing their families. A car can't be evil, this has to be a coincidence for sure. After it served time as a cop car, it was sold to an old man. Nothing happened to him, but several people who vandalized the car, it didn't end well for them. One of them was killed by an 18-wheeler, several more were decapitated, and 4 of them were struck by lightning. Dude, when I die, I want to come back as an evil car so I can summon lightning. The car was later destroyed and the pieces were scattered so it could no longer summon God's wrath. But apparently, someone bought all the pieces and reassembled the beast. Part of me wants someone to give this motorized murderer a self-driving upgrade just to see what happens. Just leave out like a talking GPS, it's an evil car from 1964, it probably only says racist slurs.